little taken aback as one of my favorite politicians on the left, surprisingly enough, has been labeled by the establishment media as being a transphobe because she's insisting that biological males not be allowed to compete with biological females in women's sports. Of course, by doing this, she has attracted many on the cultural right for being an advocate of common sense and for having the understanding that biological men actually have a very significant competitive advantage over biological women, and that it would probably be better if they didn't compete in the same sports. But the establishment and the cultural left aren't seeing it that way. Instead, she's being called a huge, horrible bigot for advocating this idea. And this is exactly why people like me on the right tend to like her. Now, just as a little aside here on Tulsi Gabbard, me and her have actually met. I actually met her and asked her a question at a college event at the campus that I went to college at. And needless to say, we hit it right off.
I mean, when they start coming after you and they start labeling you,
they're already coming
yeah,
after me.
so they start labeling you an Assad apologist or a Russian puppet. And so my question is, how would your administration handle that differently, or how would you actually succeed?
We actually had a lot of chemistry. It was almost like the time as a libertarian that I went to Washington, D.C. and hit on Ann Coulter.
Hi, I'm Robert Thomas from the College of Charleston, and I just first like to say you have just been lovely tonight, I think. You've been great. A lot of respect.
Because that's what I do. I go to campus events, and I hit on powerful women. Because that's what I'm attracted to. I'm attracted to power. But to go back to Tulsi Gabbard, she's being labeled by the establishment and the cultural left in this country as a horrible transphobe because she just recognizes some basic common sense facts. And that is that when biological males compete with females, they have a competitive advantage. And it's probably not a great idea for biological men to compete with biological women in sports like wrestling, where they can physically dominate their female opponents. Because the last time I checked, society believed it was actually wrong for men to initiate violence against women. That it's wrong to hit a woman. But with the whole gender ideology movement, all of a sudden, if a biological man initiates violence against a biological female, as long as that biological male identifies as a woman, I guess it's okay. Because if you're a biological male and you join a sport like MMA fighting, and you actually end up breaking the skull of your female opponent, you're liable to be labeled as the bravest athlete in American history. And I guess people like Tulsi Gabbard have realized that, you know what? That doesn't sound a lot like women's rights and women's liberation to me. And because of this common sense approach to gender and life in general, it is exactly why Tulsi Gabbard was the most popular candidate in the Democratic Party with Republicans. I believe that the statistic was that almost 50% of her support was from Republicans and people who voted for Trump in 2016. There are people that were tired of the establishment, people that were a little more non-interventionist, that liked the fact that she was talking about staying out of unnecessary wars and foreign entanglements. They actually liked a lot of those substantive meat and potato issues she was bringing to the table. But in the land of the cultural left, that kind of meat and potatoes doesn't really matter. Because as it turns out, the bastion of boomer and millennial establishment left culture SNL went so far as to label her as tonight's villain on their debate episode of their show.
And let's introduce underdog candidate and tonight's villain, Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you, Rachel. What an honor it is to be on this stage with my fellow candidates. I want you to know that I smell your fear and it makes me stronger. I'm wearing the white suit of your fallen hero, Hillary Clinton. Now fight me, cowards.
And maybe we need to have fewer debates. I think you're hurting your cause.
Speaking of hurting our cause,
Tulsi Gabbard?
present.
Why are you here?
Democrats, I'll get you, my party, and your little mayor, too.
Only a truly out of touch establishment socialite liberal could possibly look at a woman as innocuous as Tulsi Gabbard and consider her to be a cackling villain. You have to be truly out of touch with both your party and normal people in general to have a worldview anything close to that. And the fact that a national comedy show was making jokes in that way just shows you how out of touch the whole socialite cosmopolitan establishment is with your everyday person in both the Republican Party and, as it also turns out, the Democratic Party. The kind of liberal laughs at a joke like that is the kind of liberal who went and voted for Hillary Clinton and actually liked it, who actually believed that Hillary Clinton was a good candidate who would actually bring change to the country. I don't know what kind of person would believe something like that, but I think if there were a liberal who believed anything similar to that, that it would probably be the kind of liberal who would write for a magazine like Jezebel. The same magazine that is now labeling Tulsi Gabbard as, again, a horrible transphobe because, of course, she's coming out in favor of this bill. The same magazine that looks at her as just this terrible, cackling villain of a politician. And they list all of her cons at the bottom of the page. And they talk about all the cons of Tulsi Gabbard, like she's against the drug war. She wants to bring home the troops and end the wars. She wants to work to end the war in Syria with Bashar al-Assad. She favors Hindu self-determination. She even opposes biological men competing with biological women in violent sports. And these are the cons of Tulsi Gabbard as listed by Jezebel. It's not that often that you read an article listing the cons of someone as a politician where all of the cons listed are actually pros. So to me, for the left in general, and the cultural left, and establishment left, and far left, all the left, you really got to kind of ask yourselves, what direction do you really want to go in? Do you want to continue to go in this sort of Jezebel direction where the thing you care about most is whether or not biological males can compete with biological females in sports? Or would you rather support somebody a little more substantive like Tulsi Gabbard, who actually wants to challenge the establishment and do things to end violence and wars that are actually killing people overseas? I think the answer is obvious. But as the establishment Democratic Party operates, it's exactly like the common phrase that I've heard on the internet several times, which is this: Republicans drop bombs and Democrats drop bombs with LGBT pilots.
Democrats, I'll get you, my party, and your little mayor, too.